Welcome to Living the Smarter Science of Slim, where we provide a scientifically proven lifestyle for long-term health and fat loss by eating more and exercising less, but smarter.
Eat smarter, exercise smarter, live better. I am so ready for that.
Hey everyone, Jonathan Bailor here, back with another bonus Smarter Science of Slim podcast. Really excited about today's show. Think we're ready to have just a brilliant conversation with just a brilliant woman. We have a woman who was the food and nutrition director at Health Magazine, obviously a large magazine, for nearly 8 years. She is a internationally known health expert. She's a registered dietitian. She's a New York Times bestseller, and she has some very interesting work in the past and coming up in the future that I think will just lend to a wonderful conversation. We have none other than Frances Largeman-Roth with us today. Frances, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much.
Well, Frances, the thing I really wanted to get started on and chat about here was let's back up and talk about your story and how you got to, because you've been all around the country, all around the media talking about healthy eating. What was your evolution from little Frances to today's internationally known Frances?
Well, that's a great question because there actually has been quite a journey. And little Frances wanted to be a veterinarian. From the age of 5, I was really just focused on that. And I knew that I wanted to go to Cornell and I wanted to study animal science. And indeed, that is what I did. I went to Cornell undergrad, studied animal science, and did 4 years undergrad as an animal science major. But somewhere in there, I started getting a little disillusioned with what they were teaching us. It was about building a bigger, better cow, building a bigger, better sheep, getting, the most meat off of the animal, the highest milk production, that kind of thing. And I mean, I had been a vegetarian for 10 years, but I just was kind of starting to grasp, I think, what factory farming was and why I didn't want to have anything to do with it. And I was really enjoying my animal nutrition classes. And I thought, you know what? Let me look into human nutrition, and maybe that's my path. Maybe that's a good way for me to go. So that's what I did. I changed my major to human nutrition, stayed an extra year. And another thing that really influenced me, Jonathan, was that I lost my father at the age of 12. And he had type 2 diabetes. He also had high blood pressure, and he had central adiposity, which is, the apple shape with the belly. And he had a stressful job. He was a dentist and he ran his own business. And he did not really take care of himself. He didn't manage his diabetes through diet and exercise. And as I started taking these human nutrition courses, I was connecting all the dots, and I was seeing that his early death really at the age of 62 could have been prevented, that he really just had to make some lifestyle changes. And I wanted to help people do that. I wanted to help people enjoy food, but do it in a healthy way and live long, healthy lives.
Well, Frances, that's certainly a very touching story, and it's often when we have these personal experiences. So often, I mean, you know me, I'm a science guy, but the more time I've spent out there, not behind a desk doing research, the more I see that the science is certainly necessary, but it's not sufficient, because eating is such an emotional and our lifestyle is such an emotional and deeper issue that making that personal connection and having a personal reason to pursue health is often so important to people. So, and I can only imagine that the movement you made over to Health Magazine it was driven again by this passion, and just give me a little bit of insight into how one goes from studying at university to reaching the upper echelons of mainstream media. What is that path like?
Well, I knew that I wanted to write. And so even when I was still undergrad and hadn't become a registered dietitian yet, I knew I wanted to write. And I actually called an alumnus from Cornell who was working, I believe it was at Women's World or Women's Day magazine. And I said, hey, I'm an undergrad and, I'm thinking about becoming a dietitian, but I'm not sure if it's really that important for me to get my RD because what I really want to do is write. And she said, well, that's a great question, Frances. But if I was looking at two pitches, one from a journalist and one from a writer who also had an RD, and the story was about something related to nutrition and healthy eating, I would go with the RD. And I said, okay, that kind of seals the deal for me. So I went ahead and pursued the RD knowing that I wanted to write, but knowing that I needed to get some sort of clinical experience first. And so when I finished my RD at Columbia, I moved out to San Francisco because, this was the 90s and there was such a health movement in California and I wanted to be where the action was. So I moved to San Francisco and I ended up getting a job right out of school at a place called the John Kaiser Wellness Center. And it was a really interesting place. It was, they had MDs on staff. They had me. It was a complementary medicine clinic. And there were massage therapists. There was a Watsu therapist. There was an acupuncturist on staff. And so it was an amazing place to work, really kind of ahead of its time. And our focus population had HIV and AIDS. So it was, such an amazing education for me. It was also very intense because I had patients who were very sick and, even lost some patients along the way. And I probably would have stayed out in San Francisco had my mother not gotten ill. So she ended up developing multiple myeloma. And I wanted to move back east because, it's funny. There's just that 3-hour time difference, but you really feel a world away when you're on the opposite coast of your loved ones. So I ended up moving to Washington, D.C. But before I moved there, I pitched myself to the Discovery Channel, which was launching the Discovery Health Channel at the time. And I said, I'm a dietitian. I don't have any writing clips. I do have patient handouts. Can I send you my patient handouts as writing samples? And they said, sure. And amazingly, they hired me as a staff writer. And I moved to DC. I worked for the Discovery Health Channel for a couple of years. And then I moved on to a website called foodfit.com. And I was their managing editor for 3 years. And that was a pretty amazing startup. We actually had a chef on staff. And I worked with her to develop the healthy recipes that we had. And we came out with a newsletter every week with a new recipe in it. And that really kind of laid the groundwork for the next step, and that was Health Magazine.
Well, Frances, I love hearing this story. Not only is it an engaging one, but it seems like you're in some ways one could characterize your career as an evolution, because you then were a wonderful influence at Health Magazine for nearly a decade, and certainly published some New York Times bestselling books, which I'd love to talk a little bit about, but then went off on your own and even have a new title coming up called Eating in Color, which I'm excited to get into because I too very much promote eating in color. But just to quickly pause and to continue that story of evolution, the work you did over at Health Magazine, I know some of our listeners are going to be interested. I know they're going to check out your work, as they should. I know they're going to look you up, and they're going to stumble upon a book which on the back of it says, "Eat the carbs you love, lose weight fast." And then there is pasta, bread, potato chips, pizza, all with exclamation points next to them. And then the statement, "These foods will make you thin." So can we talk a little bit about your work with the carb lovers diet, and then what you have maybe transitioned to in your new journey in life?
Sure. Well, the carb lovers diet was really we were taking a risk because even though people had, this book came out in 2010, and even though people had kind of come off of the extreme low carb bandwagon, which was really hot in the 90s and the early 2000s, there was and there still is a lot of anti-carb sentiment out there. At the same time, you have a lot of folks, especially women, who just love their carbs, and really don't function well without them. They might be able to cut them out for a few weeks at a time, maybe a month, and they will lose weight. However, they are extremely cranky while they're doing so, and it's not something that they can stick to. And especially when you're raising a family like I am, I have a 4-year-old and a 19-month-old, you find that a lot of these carbs end up on the dinner table. And of course, you can always go for the healthier versions, the whole grain versions of them. But, it just, you can't really raise a family on steak alone or steak and chicken alone. So our approach to this diet was really about something that worked and something that people could follow that didn't make them crazy. And we found that the dieters who we put on the Carb Lovers diet loved the diet, loved the food, found it very easy to follow, and they lost weight.
And certainly it sounds like the focus was not, certainly we all know, myself included, there's things that need to be done to, for lack of better terms, sell books. And certainly we look on the back of this book, we see potato chips, pizza with exclamation points next to them. I would imagine that the actual intention of the Carb Lovers diet is to say, if you love carbs and if trying to get rid of them makes you hate your life, certainly stop doing that. That's not the goal of anyone. Maybe shift to more fiber-rich and nutrient-dense sources of carbs. Increase the quality of the carbs in your diet. Am I on the right track?
Yes, but there was also something else, Jonathan, and that was resistant starch. So there was we kind of landed on some research regarding resistant starch, which is a type of carbohydrate that acts like fiber. It isn't actually fiber, but that's how it acts in the body, and it helps you feel full longer, and it also helps to kick up the fat burning process. So we incorporated the foods that were the highest in resistant starch, and the number one resistant starch food is actually a slightly green banana. So also barley, a healthy carb, potatoes, pasta, but potatoes and pasta, when they're cooked and then cooled, have higher rates of resistant starch than when they're hot. And also, we used a lot of beans, we used a lot of other whole grains, and we tried to make the carbs that you were eating the most filling carbs that you could possibly get. So, we ended up putting ground up oats in the pancakes and things like that. And so people really felt satisfied, but they were losing weight.
Fascinating. Because what we always talk about here at Smarter Science Slim is we talk about sane versus insane calories. And sane calories are calories that are more satisfying. They have a less detrimental hormonal impact on the body, or they're less aggressive. They're nutritious, meaning they contain a lot of they contain a lot of nutrition per calorie, and
Right.
They're inefficient, meaning that the body is less likely to store them as fat simply because it would take longer to convert it into triglyceride, to geek out for a second. So it sounds like what you've done is you've identified if getting rid of starchy carbohydrates makes me so crabby that any health benefit I may get from doing so is mitigated by the mental impact or the practicality impact, negative impact it has on my life. What you do is you identify starchy carbohydrates, which might be best defined as more sane or more satisfying, unaggressive, nutritious, and inefficient than other starchy carbs. Is that somewhat fair characterization?
Yes, and then I think the other thing that people learned on this diet was what a serving size is. So they learned that they could have pasta, whether it was plain white pasta or whole grain pasta, but they learned, wow, I can have 1 cup cooked. So you did have to actually measure out, especially when you were first starting the diet, what you were eating for the diet to actually work for you. And so I think that was another message in the book, was that, yes, you can have these foods, but you cannot eat entire, huge serving bowls full of pasta and lose weight. And, as with any diet, if you also add exercise to it, it's going to be much more effective.
So it sounds like it's and I think that's really the key. And we talk about focus and the evolution of your career, and I would love to start to talk about the focus of your next work. But so there's two things I'm hearing when we talk about the carb lovers diet. One is that, and correct me if I'm wrong with this first one, the focus of your diet is not necessarily on eating as many sources of resistant starch as possible. It's probably not the 11 servings of starch that the USDA food guide pyramid recommended. Of course, correct me if I'm wrong. And then secondarily, this is a program designed for individuals who, if they try to give up starches completely, just feel terrible. And the reason I make that second point is, if hypothetically, I'm an individual who does not feel terrible when I give up starches, would you prefer that an individual fills up their plate with nutrient-dense vegetables and nutrient-dense fruits in place of resistant starches? Or would you say, actually, no, resistant starches are so good that they should be prioritized above fruits and vegetables?
Definitely never above fruits and vegetables. And, if you look through the Carb Lovers Diet and especially the Carb Lovers Diet cookbook, you will see a ton of fruits, vegetables, and legumes mixed in with the carbohydrates. And, the resistant starch thing, as every diet book has to have a gimmick. So I would say that was our gimmick. And fortunately, there was a lot of really sound science around it, but it's kind of a funny thing because, you find resistant starch in really healthy whole grains, such as barley, but you also do find some of it in potato chips. Mm-hmm. So that kind of allowed for us to make the diet appeal to a lot of different people. And it also was very inexpensive to follow. And I think that was one of its key selling points, because some of those diets out there, like paleo, very, very expensive to follow. So definitely not saying that resistant starch is any better than any other food group, but saying, hey, look, it's really filling if you want to lose weight and you want to also be able to exercise, because I think that's something that athletes really find challenging on low carb or reduced carb diets, is that there's no way to replenish their glycogen stores, and or no way to do it quickly enough so that they can exercise on Monday and also exercise on Tuesday without bonking and without feeling like they don't have any energy. So that's sort of where we were coming from.
Oh, Francis, I think that is a very wonderful distinction, and it's fascinating because we talked about the 90s and the approach taken to conscious carbohydrate consumption in the 90s, and how there there was, and if you look at, for example, the new Atkins book, the new Atkins for a New You, the term well-formulated low carbohydrate diet is now very important, because if you look at the early Atkins books, and again, everything's got to have a gimmick, right? So they say, well, what foods are low in carbohydrate? Well, fatty corn-fed beef, and you can eat hamburgers all day, and you can eat butter on top of your bacon. And if you actually look, for example, the new Atkins for the New You book, written by 3 amazing researchers, they talk about a properly formulated low carbohydrate diet, which very much focuses much more on nutrient density and much more on having, if you're going to eat a low carbohydrate diet, make sure you're getting it from the most nutrient dense sources possible. And it seems like almost with the Carb Lovers diet, there was a similar thing there. You needed that hook, but at its core, and as is very much reflected in your new book, Eating in Color, if you're going to go a little bit higher carb route, there's a well-formulated way to do that, and there's a poorly formulated way to do that. And you've identified a component, resistant starch, which can contribute to a more well-formulated, higher carbohydrate diet, should that be the route that gives an individual the most success. Is that fair?
That's fair. That's fair. And I think, one thing that you keep touching on is that if that works for you, because I absolutely agree that there's not one diet that works for everyone. And some people need more protein. Some people need animal protein. Some people don't. Some people can, be extremely athletic on a vegan diet. I can't personally do that. I was vegetarian for 10 years, and those were probably the 10 years that I was least healthy. I certainly also probably wasn't doing it optimally, but as a college student. But I think that it actually does take a lot of tinkering and a lot of trial and error to find out what works for an individual. And with eating in color, I like to write about where I am, in life. And so I wanted to do a cookbook that was for families, but that really wasn't about, these are sort of kid meals that the whole family will love. It was more about, we know, all of the studies done in this country on produce consumption show that we are way behind. We are not getting the 5 to 9 servings a day. So I wanted to do something that really just got people, instead of trying to, focus on serving sizes and measuring things, I wanted it to be fun. I wanted it to be just based on color. And so eating in color is, as the name implies, based on color, based on the rainbow, actually. So that's how the chapters are organized, is by color: red, orange, yellow, green. And then I have a blue, indigo, violet chapter. I also have a black and tan chapter, because not all the healthy foods are colorful. There are certainly plenty of nuts and seeds and beans and grains that fit into that black and tan chapter that are extremely healthy for you. And so, I wanted to throw that in as well. So it has over 90 recipes in it. And then interspersed between the recipes, you'll find ingredient profiles. And I think, this is one thing that people seem to be getting really excited about as I talk about the book, because you might, within a season, for example, right now it's spring, asparagus is in season. And so you might sort of be thinking about asparagus and how to use it right now, but then you forget that it's in season in spring and how to pick it out. And so all of these ingredient profiles tell you what it is, what's so great about it for you, how to choose it, how to store it, and how to use it. Mm-hmm. And so this is something that you're going to refer to all year round, and that you're going to come back to not only for the recipes, but also for this additional information.
I love that. I love that. And I think certainly the eating in color and the focus on fresh produce, I think, is so important, because I recently had a conversation with Dr. Joel Furman, who I'm sure you, like me, have much respect for, obviously a great contributor to the field. And he makes a wonderful point about ensuring we don't crowd the most nutrient-dense sources of calories off our plate with less nutrient-dense sources, and really not sacrificing. If we're looking at this from a purely nutritional perspective, which is an incomplete perspective, but it's a perspective, which is to, again, ensure that we don't sacrifice the best, we don't push the best off our plate and fill it with the good, unless we have to for financial reasons, or unless we want to for emotional reasons, and then we're okay with the results. And the reason I mention this, Frances, is you mentioned early on that some of the concerns with other dietary approaches may be based around practicality and maybe based around affordability. And it seems like your approach really prizes those very highly. They say, I'm going to assume you cannot exclusively fill your plate with locally grown produce, with non-farmed, grass-fed meats and fish, and not exclusively with high-fiber, nutrient-dense fats such as cocoa, coconut, avocado, nuts, seeds, yada, yada, yada. Because of that, you're going to need some things like beans and grains. But would you classify, ignoring practicality and ignoring pleasure for a moment, do you ever see individuals potentially conflating that which is, I would argue, the best, which would be the fresh, nutrient-dense produce, the fresh and non-farmed sources of protein, and the fiber-rich, nutrient-dense fats, conflating those with beans and whole grains, which are better for you than McDonald's, but really aren't in the same ballpark as the three food groups, quote unquote, I mentioned earlier. Is that fair?
Well, I would love to know, Jonathan, actually why you put them in that order. For example, why would a legume, let's take a black bean or the black bean, which is rich in antioxidants, rich in fiber, and can really help to stabilize blood sugar. And, many studies have shown that beans can play a vital role in preventing diabetes. Why does that fall lower on, in the hierarchy for you than an avocado?
Well, I would say a couple things. So I would only eat an avocado if my goal was to take in nutrient-dense, fiber-rich fats. If my goal was to take in fiber, my number one choice would be non-starchy vegetables, because calorie for calorie ain't going to find a better source of fiber than a non-starchy vegetable. And that's just purely from a mathematical perspective. I would choose non-starchy vegetables. They may not be the most delicious, but mathematically they are the most fiber rich. And then if my goal was to eat protein, I would look for the most protein for my calorie buck. So I would look for things like grass-fed meats. I would look for things like wild-caught fishes, because those will provide me with more protein per calorie than any plant would. And then if my goal was, like I said, to eat fats, I would look to eating fibrous fats such as avocado, nuts, seeds, cocoa, coconut, things like that. So it's a question of what is, like, if I'm eating a bean because my goal is to get fiber and to get full and to get some protein, I would say, well, why not eat some grass-fed beef along with some kale, spinach, and broccoli? Wouldn't you get even more for your calorie buck?
Well, I think that you are an optimal eater, and I think that you optimize every meal, and that is because you are a professional and you have all of this knowledge at your fingertips. Most Americans don't, and most Americans have to, create 7 dinners a week for their family, or at least 5 dinners a week, let's say. Maybe they eat out the other 2 nights. So I don't think that it's practical for most people, including myself, to have the grass-fed beef 5 nights a week, or even to have, the grass-fed beef and the wild-caught salmon, and maybe some free-range eggs in there. It is just not practical from a financial standpoint, and also, I truly believe that that God put all these things on the planet for us to eat, and certainly to pick and choose from. But there's a reason why we have such a variety of food. And I have never been a big fan of excluding, whole groups of foods. Now, junk food is a different story, because that's all man-made. That's all stuff that we created that was not existing here. So I really I try not to just, put certain foods on pedestals and other ones are a step below. I really think that you should mix it up. Just like you should mix up your fat sources, you should mix up your protein sources. And just like a diet of only kale is not optimal. So again, there's the rainbow, and you'll be happy to hear that in that Black and Tan chapter, coconut is one of the featured ingredients. So I did try to really bring a lot of the what are now trendy, but have been sort of in the health arena for a long time, to light. Things like quinoa and chia seed, hemp seed, coconut. So I think that when you take a look at eating in color, Jonathan, you're going to really sort of see a lot of things that gel with you. But again, this book is not a diet. It is a cookbook, but it's also a way of eating. It's a lifestyle, and it encourages people to shop their local farmers market. It encourages people to sign up for a CSA, which I did for the first time last year, and it really kind of changed my life and the way that I fed my family. So I'm really excited about it, and can't wait to get you a copy.
Well, Francis, the thing that I actually love about this is it is an unquestionable fact that humans are a very diverse group of individuals, and that if you do look at even our anthropological record, the diets which we ate varied wildly. If you look at some Pacific Islander cultures, we were talking a 90+% carbohydrate diet. If you look at some Arctic cultures or some African cultures, we're looking at a 90+% fat diet. So certainly there is a diversity of things that work. And the distinction that I love here, and the thing that I love about your messaging about eating in color, is we have to be specific about our goals. If our goal is to eat like a caveman, then that's a specific goal. If our goal is to find the perfect diet, and let's define perfect by providing truly the absolute maximal amount of essential nutrients and components and the absolute minimal amount of everything else at the expense of practicality or enjoyment or anything like that, that's a different goal. And if you have a goal which is to be healthy, to be slim, to not die prematurely, to not become diabetic, and to really just take more of a practical approach, that is a different goal. And certainly you will eat differently. And I think that's what's reflected in eating in color, is this more, I'm not here to try to be perfect. I'm here to enjoy life and focus on practicality and focusing on getting the most bang for my buck. Is that fair?
Yeah, and because it is a family cookbook, it assumes, you certainly don't have to have a family to enjoy the recipes, but it assumes that, you want things to be fairly quick. You're not spending 2 hours creating a meal, and that you are going to be working with some pantry staples. And so some things that you have on hand, some things that are fresh, putting them together in a really, quick, simple way. And, I think that it's the way that, to me, the way that only makes sense, to be incorporating those really healthy things, but in a way that suits our crazy lives, and in a way that also helps to reduce our impact on the planet at the same time.
Well, I think it's such a key point, Francis, to say that it's so easy for individuals such as probably me more so than you to get wrapped around the axle of science and that which is perfect, and sometimes losing sight of the fact that if 99% of Americans, for example, just ate any sort of thing found in nature, beans, whole grains, whatever, if they were actually eating those instead of eating soda and chips and just garbage, oh my gosh, they would be so much healthier, right?
Exactly.
And I think that's really the key thing to remember here is, listeners, remember that if you're listening to this podcast, you're probably in the 1%. And I appreciate that, and that's awesome. And like, let's all pat ourselves on the back, but let's also realize that our example is a profound influence, but we also need to give tools, and we also need to give baby steps or on-ramps to the rest of the population. And it sounds like eating in color is just that.
Absolutely.
Well, Francis, what is, obviously eating in color is coming out. What's next for you? You've had a pretty varied career. What's next?
Well, that's a great question. I'm always looking into every opportunity that comes my way, and I'm also a spokesperson, a TV spokesperson for Cooking Light magazine. So through that, I get a ton of opportunities in the media, and have been doing a lot of guest appearances on Dr. Oz and the Today Show, and also on Access Hollywood Live. So we will see. I'll keep you posted, but just trying to keep it interesting.
I love it. Well, it certainly sounds like if we want to keep up on your work, we should just turn on our television, and it sounds like it would be pretty hard to miss you.
Yeah, and your listeners can also go to francislargeman-roth.com, and I post all of my appearances on my website, and they can also follow me on Facebook and Twitter.
I love it. Well, again, that URL is Francis Largeman-Roth, and that's FrancisLargemanRoth, and her brand new book coming out. Francis, am I correct? Is it January 2014?
That's right.
January 2014, coinciding with another book called The Calorie Myth by Jonathan Bailor. No, I'm just kidding. It's called Eating in Color, and certainly can't wait to see that, Frances, and appreciate you so much for joining us and for all the good you do there to help bring culture along into a more healthy and fit lifestyle, because certainly the more people we can get out there spreading that message, the better. So thank you.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Listeners, I hope you enjoyed today's podcast as much as I did. And remember, this week and every week after, eat smarter, exercise smarter, and live better. Talk with you soon.
Wait, don't stop listening yet. If you like the podcast and if there's other ways we can help you, please join us in the Smarter Science of Slim support group, which is freely available at the Smarter Science of Slim website, smarterscienceofslim.com. There you'll find all kinds of free recipes and success stories and just all kinds of fun stuff, like how to help your kids go sane and just great community content.
And just one last thing before you go, if you wouldn't mind heading over to iTunes and up onto Amazon.com and leaving us a review, and then going over to Facebook and liking us, we would hugely appreciate it.